Good day to you. This week's tutorial is designed for managing agents, trustees and owners, and it arises from a question asked by a member, Carol Wright, on the discussion forum this week. It deals with the enclosure of balconies in sectional title schemes. You'll see that I've given you three pictures, the first showing a big open balcony, the second showing how it might be used if it were closed, the greater utility perhaps, and finally showing you a face-on picture of a block in which some of the balconies have been enclosed and some haven't. That in fact is a big building in the middle of Sea Point in Cape Town. A quick overview: why are balconies enclosed? What does the process involve? The first inquiry, which is the most important, and that is, what is the legal nature of the balcony? Is the section an extension? Is the enclosure an extension of the section? Some preliminary issues that always need to be considered and are very important, and then finally the requirements for each different legal situation. So what is the motivation behind owners wanting to enclose balconies? Well, I'm afraid it is an almost inevitable situation when there are open balconies. People want to create more interior space, and the reason for that, many issues may be raised, but at the end of the day, it is more valuable to have your space enclosed. It's an increased leasable area or lettable area. So whilst protection for the weather or security may come into the equation to some or other extent, in my view, it's almost always wanting to beneficiate the apartment, wanting to make it more valuable, make it capable of performing a greater and wider function in terms of how many people it keeps and houses. What does the process involve? Well, firstly, it depends on the type of balcony enclosure that one's talking about. It might just be a few windows mounted on part of the balcony wall. It might be an entire enclosure, and the enclosures might present themselves as stackable. These new floating glass panels that have come in the last 10 years. They flick-flack across the surface, and you can in fact remove them entirely. So it can be argued that this is, it's not a permanent enclosure, it's just something that encloses it some of the time when the weather requires that, but for the rest it might be open. It might involve on top stories adding a roof or having an enclosure that bends around the exterior surface of the balcony so as to provide total cover. It might or it might not change the look of the building, and this is obviously very important because a general standard look to a building is internationally considered to be something that maintains property values. If you have every balcony looking slightly different, it is generally considered that the overall appearance of the building is negatively affected. And of course the question, is enclosure an extension of the section? And that we'll deal with. The first inquiry, as I have said, is what is the legal nature of the balcony? Is it a part of the section or not? Now, it's either going to be part of the owner's section or it's going to form part of the common property. There are only two possibilities, and those are they. The trustees can make sure they can determine the nature of the balcony simply by inspecting the scheme sectional plan. If the balcony forms part of the section, it will be situated within the solid lines that indicate the boundaries of the section on the sectional plan. So if it's part of the section, the situation will be easier to handle, because enclosing the balcony will then definitely not amount to an extension of the owner's section. However, the alteration will still need to be approved by the trustees, and below we will look at the considerations that they should take into account in this situation. But what if they find, no, it's not part of the scheme's common property, no, it is in fact part of the scheme's common property? Well, then there's a second question. Is that common property balcony subject to exclusive use rights in favour of the adjoining section owner or not? And this is important because the trustees can authorise building improvements to exclusive use areas if they're not extensions to sections. So when will a proposed balcony enclosure be an extension of a section? Well, have a look at the exact wording of section 24(3) in the Act. It says that if an owner of a section proposes to extend the boundaries or floor area of his or her section. So the thing you have to focus on is this an extension? Does this proposal show that the boundaries or the floor area will be extended? And what does that mean? Well, The first question is fairly simple. Is there going to be more floor area in the section as a result of this particular enclosure? If we were adding a mezzanine floor, it would be obvious. Yes, there's more floor area. Where you're simply enclosing a balcony, then and it's not part of a section, well, yes, then you are increasing the floor area. If, in fact, your boundaries are being extended, the interior living space is effectively being increased. So that's the fundamental argument. There are some preliminary issues that apply in either event. Firstly, is it going to negatively affect the appearance of the building? In terms of Prescribed Management Rule 68.1.4, an owner may not do anything to his or her section or exclusive use area that is likely to prejudice the harmonious appearance of the building. And the fundamental consideration in this case is whether or not the proposed change will negatively affect the overall appearance of the building and therefore affect the market value of all the units in the scheme. This means that it is difficult to interpret. What is considered harmonious or inharmonious or nice or not nice is very subjective. There's no proper process for getting consensus that the proposed change complies with this requirement. In practice, when considering an application for a balcony enclosure, an owner and the trustees should get the views of other owners to see whether or not they think it would prejudice the appearance of the building. Bear in mind that the trustees must ensure that any changes are in accordance with approved building plans insofar as those are required. So if an owner wants to change something and says, no building plans are required for this, well, then he must show that. An architect must give a certificate, or the local authority must say, there's no building plans required for this, because if there are, then those plans must be a necessary part of the process. When you talk about the local municipality, you also need to talk about bulk or floor area ratio. Enclosing a balcony can affect this, and it's a zoning requirement that determines what percentage of the area of the earth or lot or stand may be covered with habitable buildings. So if in fact the scheme is built in such a way that there's no bulk left for the building, in terms of the town planning scheme, and this balcony could be open but it can't be closed, then in fact to enclose it is in fact a breach of the town planning scheme. So you have to check that aspect as well as building plans with the local authority. Then there are engineering aspects. When an architect designs a balcony which is open, he designs it completely differently to the way in which he would design it if it were to be closed. So, for example, you will find with open balconies, they are like the wet deck of a ship. They are intended that the rain will come in and flow off. So there's a slope balcony. There are weep holes that allow water that falls onto that balcony floor surface naturally to flow off. There are cavity walls which don't exist if the balcony is intended to be open, but which would have been put there if it had been intended to be closed. So one needs to look at this thing and say, you're going to close it? Okay. How would it have been designed if it were intended to be closed? Because if it isn't, if the design isn't changed, if you don't straighten out the floor, if you don't put a cavity wall on the exterior surface, then you're going to have problems. And the real question is, how would the architect who designed this building have designed this bit if he'd been told it must be closed? And those are the changes that owners and trustees should require, so as to ensure that there won't be trouble for the sections below and leaking and this sort of thing. Well, you can't be sure about leaking, but you can take some steps to avoid the risk. There are going to be changes now to the exterior envelope of the building. So who is going to be responsible? Let's say that you are extending. Whether you're extending or not doesn't matter. You're going to have a structure. Who's going to be responsible for repairs? If this owner is now going to go and get somebody to put in a windows or a roof or whatever it is, but what happens in due course? Is that going to become part of the common property? And if it is, because you are extending the section, who is going to be responsible? Do you need a special rule to say, you built it, you look after it, you and your successors in title? These are issues that must be considered. And then a final one, which can be very difficult, is will owners require a payment for the consent? Sometimes when taking up a part of what is common property, whether it's subject to exclusive use rights or not, owners will say, okay, but we have an ownership share in that. So you must pay us some money before you're allowed to enclose your balcony and effectively extend it so as to make part of what we own, the common property, part of your section. That isn't always a feature of these things, but it is sometimes. Find out early whether there are going to be people who have that view, and then make sure that you take them into account. But let's go back to the legal situation and unpack the processes. If the balcony is part of the section, what are the requirements? Well, the trustees must be satisfied that the enclosure will not negatively affect the appearance of the building. They must be satisfied with all the other preliminary issues that I've spoken of. Owners should be advised, because this will it affect the appearance of the building or not is a value judgment. And if they feel strongly enough about it, the owners could, in terms of section 39(1) of the Act, give the trustees a specific direction in that regard. I strongly recommend that the first time trustees have to deal with an application to enclose a balcony, they should consider a standard specification which should be approved and attached to a new scheme rule. You're going to, in that case, you are legislating for the future, so that all future enclosures will follow that particular standard, unless that rule is changed, which is fair enough, that might be possible and necessary. If the balcony is common property, then let's look at the situation where the owner has exclusive use. If they're satisfied with all the other preliminary issues that I dealt with, the trustees can approve the enclosure as long as they are satisfied that it is not an extension of the section. But please bear in mind that in almost all cases, in most cases shall we say, the proposal will effectively be an extension of the section, even if you can flick-flack those windows back and it can be partially open. If when they are closed, it is completely waterproof, other things cutting into that area, have they leveled the floor? Does it look like you could put a bed in there? If that is the case, then you are dealing with an effective extension of the section. You must go through the section 24 procedure. The trustees must be happy that if other owners ask for the same sort of consent, they would give that. Where there's no exclusive use, well, the trustees can't approve any enclosure or any building improvements to an area of common property that's not subject to exclusive use. So you get to the situation where all owners must agree. If it's not an extension, in which case, of course, you must go the section 24 route. But if it's not an extension, we're happy with that, then either all owners agree, or you must take steps to make the area subject to exclusive use, and then because that then brings it into the situation where the trustees can give the requested permission. But now we go to if the proposed balcony is in fact an enclosure to an extension, which will be the usual situation. Section 24 does apply. You need a special resolution of owners. If the extension will have as a result that the participation quota of the section that's being extended is increased by more than 10%, all bondholders will have to agree. That is, the bondholders of every other unit in the scheme. A sectional plan of extension will have to be drafted at the expense of that owner and then registered. And that's a process that has to be managed by the trustees, because if the building work is done before, as it must be, before the sectional plan of extension is drafted, and then the owner says, oh, I'm going to sell my unit, give me a levy clearance, no, they must have the right to say, no, I'm sorry, you haven't finished the process, you've got a half completed extension. It is very sensible to incorporate all the conditions and specifications into a scheme rule, and certainly to include details of all those other matters that I've dealt with earlier in the consent itself that's given, so that the person is given a specific amount of time and they have to agree to do various things in the process of the extension. Thank you very much for watching this Paddocks Club tutorial. I hope that it's been of use to you, and I hope to hear from you in the discussion forum.